Hello everybody, my name is Marissa Solar and I am going to be presenting on the Advancing Women in Leadership Journal and on the article Seeking Gender Equity in Organizations Through Male Ally Initiatives. To provide a quick overview, women have persistently had limited opportunities into senior leadership positions in organizations. Because of this, they have been encouraged to address implicit and explicit bias, such that women are less likely to be promoted, have limited access to social networks, have fewer role models and female mentors, and receive less mentoring, face hostile work climate as leaders, and work in a masculine organizational culture. Because of this, male allyship is a recent strategy that has been employed to promote gender equity. Mary Shapiro, Maria Elena Beckstrom, Cynthia Engel, Stacy Beard, Lan Gao, Regina O'Neill, and Elisa Van Dam are all the researchers that conducted the study to find out what ways organizational issues around power play a role in the outcomes of these male allyship initiatives. A main point that researchers touched up on in this article is the role that power plays in these male ally initiatives. So when looking at what motivates men to take on these roles, the challenges they are faced with when doing so, and the benefits of their efforts for themselves and their organization, you have to consider the asymmetry of power, which is basically that women are in lower power positions and need assistance, whereas men are in higher power positions and can provide that assistance to women. So overall, power is the barrier since men in these allyships are working to dismantle a system that they benefit from. And in doing so, there is now a shift in their privilege and advantage. The main challenge in these male allyships is that by asking men to be allies in the power relocation process, you are asking them to give up some of their power. I pulled this quote from the article that explains that men have a lot to lose from pursuing gender equality because men continue to receive benefits, privileges, and advantages from the subordination of women. Because of this, it is important that organizations recognize that there is no cost-free disruption to existing power structures as they seek to share power across a greater number of people. In other words, by giving women more power in obtaining senior level positions, men have to give up some of theirs. The researchers in this article refer to the Bolman and Deal model, which we will touch up on in a few slides, but something that I do want to point out is the definition that is given to the word power. So according to Bolman and Deal, power is the capacity to get things done. But in order to get things done and to create organizational change, you need influence, which is why leaders turn to those with a disproportionate amount of power, in this case men, to go beyond moving individual women to senior positions. So not only are we supposed to move individual women to senior positions, but what we are focusing on in these male ally initiatives is changing the systems, the processes, and the culture that have advantaged men and disadvantaged women in the first place. So it's really just changing the entire system rather than just promoting a few women into these senior positions. The researchers use qualitative research methods when working with organizations with male ally initiatives. The research was conducted over an 8-year time period and consisted of conversations with men and women in a women's leadership development program. So just a brief overview of this development program. It consisted of 700 mid to senior level women. These women came from all functional areas of organization and across their global footprint. The curriculum was fairly consistent for all 22 of its cohorts, and the women worked with male allies in the last 8 cohorts to identify gendered organizational barriers. They brainstormed how to address these barriers and implemented change 6 months following the program. So the men at the leadership level of global organization business units participated beginning with the second cohort. So they did not do this with the first cohort, but starting with the second one, that is when they introduced male allies. They came from multiple countries, and they mainly had 2 roles, which was to listen to women discuss organizational barriers to gender equity, and they served as coaches after the program. So The onboarding process basically just consisted of familiarizing male allies with concepts of leadership and gender that women colleagues were engaged in, and the expectations for post-program support. In the last 8 cohorts, the male allyship was expanded and their responsibility was expanded. So in that, they worked with groups of 5 to 6 women and they brainstormed how to address selected structural issues. For about 6 months after, they worked on changing policies, expectations, and culture. The findings of this experiment were actually very interesting, mainly in that men had a very strong reaction to the word power. So some male allies resisted the word entirely, and they explained that, well, women have power too, and this definition ignores or diminishes that. Some of them spoke of not wanting to be benefactors for women, and they did not want to emphasize the existing hierarchy. To say this, someone actually said that the word power segregates me above others. Some men believed that power was part of the problem and they sought more inclusive terms, such as the word influence. So instead of saying, well, I have power over this woman, they would rather, researchers say, that they had influence. Some of them were reluctant to own the power that came with their titles, the decisions that they were allowed to make, and the control that they have impacted individuals and the organization. So by using words like influence, men align themselves with feminist power with paradigm. So what that is basically that by using words like influence, they felt that they had power with women, such as white allies during the civil rights era by marching with African American civil rights activists. They had power with them and they were aligning themselves with them rather than having power over them, and that is kind of the same concept that is being used here. The women that took part in the study also shared concerns about the Male Ally Initiative. Some of these concerns were that by including men, it was implied that women could not advance their careers and promote gender equity without help. They also were uncomfortable with the power dynamics of male-ally relationships and felt that there was a knight in shining armor response where men were taking over as a savior to the cause. There was also gender equity gatekeeping where women felt that they had to take most of the role on and not have the help of men. And they were avoiding the difficult conclusion that they are members in a low disadvantaged group. So what the researchers wanted to frame was how might organizations implement male ally initiatives while recognizing the countervailing desires of individuals to hold on to their power. To address the framing question, researchers appealed to the Bowman and Deal model, which had 4 frames, but I'm going to focus on the second and third frames, human resources, and the political side. The human resources frame believes that the conditions of employment exist to serve both the needs of the individuals as well as the organization as a whole. And the political frame addresses the concepts of power, influence, negotiations, and the win-win, win-lose mentality. So in the political frame, it's believed that all organizations have limited resources and people are going to have disagreements and there's going to be tension because of this. To ensure that male allyships are effective, it was suggested that organizations look at male ally initiatives through the HR frame, being that it seeks to build a mutual beneficial relationship between organizations and employees, including the advancement of women into senior leadership positions. But in doing so, you must also assess the role that power plays, as men will be tasked with giving up some of their power. Included in the article was this chart that identifies sources of power and how each may be enacted by senior male leaders, and it even gives possible alternatives that will encourage male allyship. When adopting male ally initiatives, leaders often look at the degree to which gender inequity currently exists and then examine how it is maintained by current organizational systems and practices. Researchers recommended that leaders should ask themselves, are men who have benefited from these organizational practices ready to change those practices and possibly diminish their advantage in doing so? Because in order to pursue these male allyships, this would have to happen. Researchers also recommended that organizations engage in conversations with men in 3 capacities. The first is that they help them see and understand contextual practices that disadvantage women and the organizational benefits of removing those barriers. Second, they must address the issues of power, privilege, and advantage. They have to recognize their power in maintaining the status quo and in changing it, and in that way their commitment will be authentic. It is also recommended that they use the intersectionality lens to not just understand experiences of women, but to acknowledge their multiple identities. Some identities, such as them being men, allow privileges, but some may handicap them, and in knowing this, it can lead them to empathize with women and their struggles. Lastly, and something that I think is very important, is including women when launching male ally initiatives. By doing this, women can share firsthand accounts and they will not continue to gender equity gatekeep. This concludes my presentation, but I do want to leave with 2 discussion questions. The first, is there a recommendation that you believe will work best when taking part in male ally initiatives? And are social justice issues only effectively eradicated or diminished when seeking the allyship of the privileged party?